Now, the African Development Bank signed protocols to disperse a 14 million US dollar grant to the government of South Sudan to boost the country's agricultural markets in a project to be implemented by the United Nations Food and Agriculture Organization. Akol Doak, an economic analyst, is on the line to help us break this down. Thank you for making the time, Mr. Akol Doak. Akol, quickly, 14 million US dollars grant signed there. But we have the Minister of South Sudan, the Minister of Finance, Din Atian, coming out to already talk a big game, saying this will help the country diverse its economy in terms of exports. Too early?
Well, I think it's a little too early. First of all, thank you for having me. The key to diversifying an economy is time and investment. This $14 million grant is supposed to target about 20,000 farming families in 3 states: Central Equatoria, Eastern Equatoria, and Jonglei states. The idea is to encourage IDPs, former combatants, to return to their home areas and then give them an incentive to commercialize their farming. Because if people start to commercialize their farming, what's going to happen now is you're going to promote food security in areas that previously had conflict. Number two, you're going to promote local production and local markets in rural villages and towns. And second, you're going to provide an incentive for IDPs and refugees to return to their home areas.
Look, Akol, Sudan has one of the most imbalanced in terms of balance of payment positions, agriculture bills. When you look at the import bill of South Sudan, it's the highest in the region. And you're already talking, the minister is already talking about exporting this agriculture produce. Is this money going to be put in the right place?
I think this money will be put because this is going to be implemented by the FAO. The grant is from the African Development Bank, but is going to the Food and Agriculture Organization. And the regulator and the overseer of this grant is the government of South Sudan through the Ministry of Finance and Planning and the Ministry of Agriculture and Food Security. But I also think that South Sudan does have the potential to begin to export agricultural goods. The areas such as Rang, they're producing a lot of agricultural commodities, but due to border closes, there's issue of exports. What South Sudan wants to do now is begin to promote commercial agriculture. Right now, the majority of South Sudanese farm in a subsistence way. They're subsistence farmers. We want to start promoting modern commercialization of agriculture and promote food exports and reduce our dependency on food imports.
Look, South Sudan unfortunately ranks highly on the corruption index on the continent. This change of model coming in from the African Development Bank, going through another agency to implement a project in the country, does this seem to be the way that assistance in the country is going to happen going forward?
Yes, I think it's the way, because right now with the new transitional government that was created last February, international partners and donors are hesitant to support the government directly. They're insisting that the government should implement the agreement fully before they can be supported directly. So what international partners and donors can do now is they can support people in need, people who are flood victims, people who are refugees, former combatants, and people who have been victims of war. They can help them indirectly through providing funds, but ensure that these funds are implemented and overseen by NGOs, UN organizations such as FAO. So that's the plan moving forward.
Akol, economy was largely dependent on oil. We saw oil as one of the most hit sectors when it came to 2020 as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic, closure of borders et al. But how does the country hope that it will be able to bounce back and get in some kind of foreign exchange?
Well, the most challenging thing that the country faced last year was, number one, the coronavirus pandemic, which reduced the price of oil and reduced the income the country is getting. But right now, there's positive. The oil prices are going up. As you see, Brent has hit its highest mark in over a year. Number two, the government is actually looking to increase production and revive Block 5A fields, which will bring an extra about 10 to 15,000 barrels per day. But the key to all this is economic diversification. The government, if it's receiving extra revenue this year, it must implement strict fiscal policies, strict monetary policies, and reinvest into other industries. They need to reinvest into agriculture. They need to reinvest into fisheries. They need to reinvest into mining. They need to find a way to diversify the economic sector.
Look, Akol, South Sudan is quite attractive, especially when it comes to, if we stick with oil, in terms of being courted by its neighbors. You have Sudan on one hand, you have Ethiopia, you have Kenya, you have Uganda, all wanting to create routes. Tanzania not leaving it out of the conversation to create routes for South Sudan's crude oil pipelines. But is there a plan to have the country export not raw but refined crude oil?
That's the biggest challenge that the country is facing is how can they begin to refine their crude? There's not a possibility that South Sudan will develop an alternative pipeline to export crude oil. It's just not feasible. The distance from the oil fields in northern Upper Nile through Port Sudan is much shorter than the distance from there to any port, if it's Tanzania, if it's Kenya. But what South Sudan can do now is begin to refine its crude and begin to sell refined petroleum products, fuel and diesel. Number one, they'll tame local demand. By taming local demand, you reduce the dependency on importation of fuel, which will then alleviate the government of having to allocate hard currency for this. Number two, you can export because South Sudan is the only petroleum producing country in the region. Significantly, South Sudan has the third largest reserves in Africa. So what they should do now is focus on ways that they can build a refinery, start satisfying local demand, and then export. Ethiopia has the second largest population in Africa, and Ethiopia has a large consumption of fuel. Kenya has one of the largest markets in Africa. It needs fuel. Tanzania, Uganda, these countries could benefit greatly from refined petroleum products than they would if they built a pipeline to export South Sudan crude.
Yeah, another major challenge that the country has been facing, especially when it came to the COVID-19 situation, was the foreign workers in the country. Many, especially coming in from Kenya and Kenyan-led companies, the likes of Equity Bank, KCB, that were setting foot in South Sudan, felt like they're being marginalized and locked out. Are we hoping this will change, or could this accelerate into a situation larger than it should be?
No, I don't think it will accelerate to a situation larger than it should be. But I think right now with COVID-19 restrictions, the biggest challenge to the economy was that the majority of these large companies, the banks, the oil consortiums, they have a lot of foreign workers. And so some of them were stuck in their countries or stuck in South Sudan and couldn't leave because of the lockdown. And I don't think it's a matter of them being targeted. I think that some countries had strict lockdown measures and they couldn't go to their countries. But I think now that there's a vaccine, the government has also introduced another lockdown. The government's ensuring that people have to wear face masks. This will begin to improve. But also this has taken a toll on the economy because there's some companies where the foreign staff leave the country and they go to their home country and they can't enter. Now there's strict COVID measures. To enter South Sudan, you need a negative COVID certificate. To leave South Sudan, to go to another country, you also need a negative COVID certificate. So every country has developed its unique COVID-19 response program. But I think now that COVID now is slowly being fought, there's a vaccine, we're going to see some positive changes.